A lot of the things that we can learn here might have applications more broadly. There's lots of things that we don't know about gas exchange in the Arctic. This box contains data loggers, which are basically miniature computers, and the data loggers record the information from all of the sensors on the weather station. My project here in Cambridge Bay is to try to understand how the ocean and the atmosphere kind of communicate with each other. And specifically, we're trying to understand how greenhouse gases like CO2 and methane move between the ocean and the atmosphere. Sometime in the middle of July, we had a strong north wind which blew a bunch of ice onto the island, and it piled up the ice. And the ice pulled our tower down, broke it right in half. So we had to remove a bunch of damaged instruments, replace those damaged instruments with new instruments, and then try to get the tower back up. Give the propeller a spin.
The weather station measures carbon dioxide fluxes directly from the ocean using a method called eddy covariance.
There are a couple of instruments near the top of the tower. One looks like a couple of forks that are kind of pointed at each other. That measures the three-dimensional wind velocity. And then there's a gas analyzer there which measures CO2 concentrations. What we're able to do is, let's say that you have an eddy, a little swirl of air that's moving up. Our instrument can detect that that swirl of air is moving up. And if that upward moving air has higher CO2 concentration, let's say, than the downward moving air, then we know that the surface must be releasing CO2 to the atmosphere. It's gases like CO2 and methane that are driving a lot of the climate change that's going on right now. And the oceans play a really important role in how those gases are cycled through the atmosphere. So the weather station gives us a view of carbon cycling from the atmosphere, but we also need to understand the context of what's going on in the ocean. At water stations, what we do is we collect water samples that we take back to our lab and analyze. And what we analyze in our lab is the dissolved inorganic carbon content, which basically tells us how much CO2 is in the water. And we also measure something called total alkalinity, which helps us learn a little bit more about basically the chemistry of the seawater.
Typically, 50% of the CO2 that we emit from land use change and fossil fuel burning is sent to the atmosphere. 25% is absorbed by the land and 25% enters the ocean. It's very easy to measure the atmospheric CO2, and it's very difficult to measure the biological CO2 that goes into the plants and the biology on land. So it's really important that we get the CO2 in the ocean correct to then work out how much CO2 is entering in the biology. The Arctic Ocean is changing, and it's really important that we have a baseline of measurements to work with as we move forward.